I remember years ago standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, which has become the National Civil Rights Museum. And I remember standing, and as you start at the bottom of the motel to go through the exhibits that are extraordinary and moving. And as you go up, you come down the hallway where Dr. King's rooms and the rooms of his companions and mentors and cabinet, if you will, were staying. They've been preserved exactly as they were. And as you go down the hall, you come to the only place to go is to the balcony. And you face to where the assassin was ready to shoot and did. And my kids were still pretty young at that time. And we just wept and remembered. I, of course, remembered the day it happened. They did not, but the feelings of loss, at least for me, the feeling of loss is still a part of my life. So this morning, I want to share with you some more words from Howard Thurman as he explains about his high resolve and his commitment. Howard Thurman was not on that balcony. He was not standing next to Dr. King for that march. Howard Thurman was way back in the crowd, but he might as well have been on the dais because of how important his preaching, his writing, and the love he brought were to the movement. So this is Howard Thurman from his Meditations from the Heart. And it's entitled, "Keep Fresh Before Me the Moments of My High Resolve." Despite, he says, the dullness and barrenness of the days that pass, if I search with due diligence, I can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But I had forgotten. At the time, it was full-orbed, it was glorious and resplendent. I was sure that I would never forget. In the moment of its fullness, I was sure that it would illumine my path for the rest of my journey. I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, authentic, but little by little, there crept into my life the dust and grit of the journey. Details, lower level demands, all kinds of cross currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, I would have fought it to the end and beyond. In the quietness of this place, surrounding by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve that in fair weather or in foul and good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Howard Thurman was born in 1899, the same year that my beloved Papi, my grandfather, was born. He was born in Daytona, Florida, in one of the 3 Black neighborhoods in the city known as Waycross. His father, Saul Thurman, was not a believer, was not a religious man. And he died of pneumonia when Howard Thurman was only 7 years old. But the young Thurman learned from his father that it was not necessary to be a devout Christian, to be a good, ethical, faithful human being. It was one of the pieces of his lifelong journey. He was raised by his mother, Alice, and his grandmother, Nancy. His grandmother had grown up enslaved and lived as an enslaved person on a plantation in Florida until emancipation. She took in laundry to help support the family, and little Howard would deliver the laundry once it was clean to whoever it belonged. His mother, Alice, worked as a cook and a maid for white families in Daytona. But as a child, Howard had many jobs. He delivered laundry, as I said. He worked in an ice cream parlor. And in fact, for the rest of his life, he would delight in making special ice creams for people who would come to visit him and his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman. Alice and Nancy raised him in the Mount Bethel Baptist Church in Waycross. And he learned there of the power of the community and the belief that a community must collectively together take responsibility. The community of Mount Bethel in Waycross recognized very early that this was a young person with great gifts, and they wanted him to go to high school. Now, public schools in Florida and in Daytona at the time only took students, African-American students, to the 7th grade. Of course, not having 8th grade meant that for the vast majority of African-American students, high school was not a possibility. Interesting, right? Cut it off at 7th grade. But the principal at the school that Howard was attending as a little boy and the members of the community, recognizing his gifts, offered to tutor him in all of the 8th grade subjects. This was a white man. And at the end of the school year, after he had studied all of those subjects, the principal tested him himself and committed that he had passed so Howard could apply to high school. In 1910 in Florida, only 492 African-American youth were able to attend high school. And there were very few schools where they could go. The closest one to the Thurmans was in Jacksonville. And so the community helped, the church helped, his mother and grandmother and Howard scrimped and saved. He was accepted to a high school in Jacksonville, and they pulled together just enough money to get him on the train. And at the train station, Howard Thurman experienced something that forever changed his life and strengthened his high resolve. He got to the window and the station master said, "You'll have to pay extra to send your trunk to Jacksonville because that battered old thing doesn't have handles, and I need handles in order to attach the tag to the trunk." Howard Thurman didn't have the money. There was no way he could get his trunk to Jacksonville. And so he moved away from the window, sat down on his trunk, and began to cry uncontrollably, feeling ashamed of himself for giving in to tears. But he felt in that moment, as he always said afterwards, he felt that the dreams of his lifetime had just been shattered. And with his head bowed, he cried until at one moment he looked in front of him on the ground, and there were 2 boots, there on the ground, and he looked up, and in front of him was an African-American man dressed in overalls who looked at him and asked him why he was crying. And he explained why. And without a word, the man just searched through his pockets and dropped the necessary coins into Howard's hands and said, "Here, good luck." And so he was able to go, and the man just left. So Howard never knew who to thank or who to send, to replace. He never knew. But in that moment, he made the commitment that if he ever made it, he would make sure that at least one child every year would have the opportunity to complete their education. And he kept that commitment and far more for the rest of his life. And so he went to Jacksonville, and his truck came with him, and he graduated as valedictorian. And then he graduated as valedictorian from Morehouse College. And then he graduated as valedictorian from the Rochester Theological Seminary. The man worked very, very hard, too hard for his own health for much of his life. And he began to be offered positions. He was offered positions as he was ordained when he came out of seminary. He was offered positions teaching. Eventually, he taught at Morehouse College. He became the dean of the chapel at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He never went back to Daytona, although he always considered that his home, but he never went back. And along the way, he began preaching not Christianity, but the religion of Jesus. Not Christianity, but the religion of Jesus, the religion of justice. The religion of Jesus as seen through the eyes of the oppressed. Fast forward into the mid-1930s, and Howard Thurman and his wife, Reverend Howard Thurman and his wife, are invited to go to India and Southeast Asia, and they're invited to tour all of these different places, and they are to speak with Christian audiences about what it's like for African Americans in the United States. And they're asked to sing spirituals at every stop, of which there were sometimes as many as 6 or 7 in a given day. And Howard's like, "No, we're not here to be a minstrel show." And yet people said, "We want to hear your music." And they finally said yes. His wife was a wonderful singer. And along that journey, which was a journey of many months, they were invited to meet Mohandas Gandhi. Perhaps you noticed in the video of the beautiful Nina Simone song, Dr. King standing in front of a portrait of Gandhi. Decades before, Howard Thurman had met with Mohandas Gandhi. And Gandhi asked him, they talked for hours. Gandhi asked him, "How can you be a Christian when Christianity has been the religion of the colonizers and of the oppressors?" In fact, that was a question they were asked at almost every stop. And Howard Thurman said, "I don't defend the Christian church. I defend the religion of Jesus." And they talked and they talked. And at the end of that conversation, the Mahatma turned to him and said, "Perhaps you and the Black people of the United States will be the next to carry the message of nonviolent protest to the world." And that's what happened. That's what happened. Howard Thurman came back to the United States, continued to preach. And eventually, this would be years later, wrote his most famous book called Jesus and the Disinherited. Before then, he was invited to He was to apply for a position as co-minister of a brand new congregation being planned in San Francisco. The other minister, who was white, Albert Fisk, interviewed the Reverend Thurman. Won't say he loved him, because apparently Reverend Fisk was a pretty grumpy guy, but thought he would be a great partner. And they founded together the Fellowship Church of San Francisco, the first major, explicitly multiracial, multicultural, and multi-faith congregation in the United States. The congregation was made up of many of the newcomers, new incoming African Americans who were coming to San Francisco in the war years, years of World War II, to work in some of the armament factories in the area. It was made up of Japanese people who were being released from internment camps at the end of the war, and white people. And the message Howard Thurman preached, which is still being preached today, is that there are, might sound familiar, many ways to reach the holy, many ways to be a good, faithful person, loving of the sacred. And that church went from just a few dozen people over the years. It grew into a sizable, and they finally built their old building. Howard Thurman met Dr. King when Dr. King was just a little boy. The Thurmans were the age of King's parents. King's father had been at Morehouse studying, because he didn't go to college until later in life, studying while Dr. Thurman was one of the professors there. Sue Bailey Thurman knew Dr. King's mother. When Thurman left San Francisco to go to Boston, to be at Boston University and preach every Sunday, he would watch baseball games with Martin Luther King. And would watch baseball games together, and King would attend all of his worship services. He was a mentor and an elder, respected throughout his life. But when he wrote Jesus and the Disinherited, Dr. Martin Luther King became a convert to the thought. And as he entered public life, which Howard Thurman never did, other than as a preacher and a teacher, as he entered public life, he brought those ideas of nonviolence and of the religion of Jesus for the people. He brought those ideas into all of what he did throughout the rest of his ministry, which was cut short so brutally. Howard Thurman spoke at the funeral of James Reeb, a Unitarian minister who was assassinated by white supremacists in Selma. Howard Thurman called the family of Viola Luzzo, a Unitarian lay leader, also killed by white supremacists in Selma. I tell you about him for many reasons. First, because he's incredibly meaningful to us, because decades before there was a Unitarian Universalist Association, there was Howard Thurman preaching what you and I affirm and believe. It was his high resolve. It is ours. It really is. Sometimes people ask, was he a Unitarian? And he may have been in a closet, I don't know. But he was our elder in faith and belief too. So I want to share with you one more thing, because I know we're getting to our time. Later, after he wrote the Meditations of Our Heart, he spoke again about his highest resolve, and this is what he said. My highest resolve is to be true to the sound of the genuine in me. May I not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. May you and I, in the embrace of this loving community, remember always our high resolve. Ashe, Amen, and blessed be.